Right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another live. It's Megan Cuniff, and I've got a special guest I'm going to introduce soon. But this was something that came up yesterday. It's a pretty interesting police corruption case out of Los Angeles County, and I had tweeted about it. I'll put a link to the tweet here in the chat, and it got a lot of interest. And I was just kind of thinking to myself, the corruption that goes on in the sheriff's department, there's so much of it and it's so multifaceted. There's so much going on. The deputy gangs issue is so interesting. I mean, as a legal affairs journalist, I'm kind of like, I just can't cover everything. But then I kind of realized that with my YouTube channel and special guests, maybe we can attempt to cover everything. So I figured I'd bring in a journalist who's done a lot of reporting on violence within the sheriff's department and deputy gangs, and actually is really familiar with this case. I've got here. I'll share the original tweet that some of you might have seen that got you here. But the police or the U.S. Attorney's Office yesterday announced a plea deal from the second deputy. There was actually a deputy who pleaded guilty back in July to basically kidnapping a guy. They were confronting a couple of black men at a skateboarding park and got told by a bystander basically, hey, leave these guys alone. And the bystander ended up getting taken on a pretty wild ride with these guys. The cops put him in the back of their SUV and ended up getting in a car accident with him, and he was injured. So they needed to try to cover that up too. It's just quite a crazy tale. And what was remarkable about it to me when I saw it was that this is a plea deal. I mean, there was an indictment that got some attention that was announced, I think, back in April, but they've pleaded guilty to this. And like I said, one of them pleaded guilty in July. The other cop, ex-cop now, is supposed to be in court at 2 p.m. in Los Angeles to plead guilty. So I've said that I'm going to cover the sentencing hearings. The one who pleaded guilty in July is scheduled to be sentenced in January. So I think that will be a good story to pick up. But with all the interest in this, I just thought I'd bring in Cerise Castle, who's been doing a lot of reporting on this and has covered this for. I'll bring her in and let her take it away and talk about how she learned about this case and her reporting. So, Cerise, were you surprised to see this plea deal, or had you been following this case?
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Megan.
Yeah.
You're my favorite legal affairs reporter. So on this case, was I surprised to see that they pled guilty? Honestly, no. I think generally when I have seen police officers that are indicted federally, they usually do plead guilty. I think the big exception being former sheriff Lee Baca, who had not one but two trials when he was federally charged. In short, them pleading guilty, no, was not surprising to me.
Yeah, and when did you first learn about this case? You said this was part of your reporting that you did on deputy gangs and then just violence within the sheriff's department back in, was it 2021 you said, or how long have you known about this incident?
Yes. I started my reporting in the deputy gangs, doing that full time in late 2020, probably like August of 2020. And this case actually happened that year, just a couple of months before I started reporting on this issue. I found out about this case through the reporting of Eileen Checkmedian at the Los Angeles Times, who used to cover the sheriff's department. She's now on the investigative team. But it was her story that brought this to my attention. And it was a story that, really just fascinated me. One, because it was unusual, and two, because these deputies went on to shoot and kill 18-year-old Andres Guardado in June of 2020.
Yes. Yes. And when did you hear about the indictment? Like, take me through the timeline of your reporting and Eileen's reporting on this and when the actual indictment came. It sounds like the LA Times reporting is probably what caught the U.S. Attorney's attention on that. Do we have any confirmation on that?
I don't have any confirmation on that, but I would imagine that it was that reporting that caught the attention. So I believe Eileen's story was originally published in January of 2021. So maybe my timeline is getting a little bit mixed up there. Maybe it was a conversation that we had. But this story was sort of on my radar when I started my reporting in 2020. It came on my radar either through a conversation with Eileen or a conversation with the young man's attorney who was in that car, Christian Contreras, who has represented a number of families who have been victimized by members of deputy gangs, both in the East Los Angeles area and the South Los Angeles County area.
And is this deputy gang related? Are these two deputies ex-deputies now, are they thought to be members of a deputy gang?
Yes, absolutely. So these two deputies, Miguel Vega and Christopher Hernandez, have been alleged by several other deputies at the Compton station to be first prospects of the deputy gang, the executioners, and then later alleged to be full-fledged members. Interestingly enough, Miguel Vega, the deputy that is going to be pleading in about an hour, he was trained by Deputy Eugene Contreras, who is another alleged executioner who, it is said, infiltrated internal affairs and is responsible for an assault on a training officer who was challenging the executioners gang inside the Compton station, as well as allegedly leaking some confidential materials that were the subject of a complaint made by another deputy about the executioners gang.
Wow. Wow. And I think for outsiders, the whole concept of a deputy gang, it might be kind of shocking. And even for people who are familiar with it, it's still shocking to hear the details of this. But this has been going on for decades, right? I mean, there's been various reporting about it over the years. And then you did a pretty big series a while back chronicling all this, right? I mean, is it pretty well known and out there that this is a problem, maybe even like a crisis within the sheriff's department?
I would say yes. In certain parts of Los Angeles County, this has been a fact of life for generations. My reporting shows that these deputy gangs have existed since at least the late 1960s. And, speaking as someone that, grew up in a low income, poverty stricken area in the Los Angeles area, I grew up hearing stories about deputy gangs. I was told from the time I was a little kid to, watch out for white deputies with bald heads because they might be Vikings. So in certain parts of Los Angeles County, yes, this is something that was just accepted as fact through anecdotes and lived experience. I think, with the reporting of, folks like Kate Cagle, myself, Eileen, Carrie Blakinger at the LA Times, this issue has continued to be elevated. And more people are becoming aware of it. The hashtag Google LASD gangs, which was created shortly following the publishing of my report from, people that were just either extremely frustrated or enthused by the work, I think has also really helped spread the message of this problem and make it aware that it's a crisis. I think people living in Los Angeles are aware that it's a crisis. I think more government bodies are buying into the fact that this is a crisis when we see, stories like that of Jesus Alegria, who was victimized in this case that we're talking about today. More people are aware that it's an issue. I think there is a little bit more impetus to do something. However, it's very rare that we see that follow through, something like guilty pleas.
Yeah, I was going to say, how unusual is it to have an actual indictment over this? When the indictment came out, I imagine that made headlines. Was that surprising? Did people see that coming? How unprecedented was it?
Yeah, in my conversations with folks that have been paying attention to this issue for the past several years, the one thing that was really surprising was the fact that these deputies were indicted for kidnapping Mr. Alegria and not the killing of Andres Guardado. That was just a lot of people were very confused, I think, by that.
Yeah. And I wonder, is there any talk about whether there was ever a federal investigation of the shooting, or was it always within Gascon's office that went on?
To my knowledge, the investigation has remained within Gascon's office. I'm not 100% sure on that one, though.
And can you take me through the details of the shooting? And I'm trying to get inside the head of like the U.S. Attorney's office and what why would they go after one and not the other? And I'm wondering if they unfortunately would see the shooting as kind of run of the mill. I mean, this seems so unusual, but the unfortunate reality is there's so many police shootings in LA County that was there something, were the facts particularly unusual, or was it another, oh, we thought he had a weapon and we were threatened, and it's just kind of one word against the other?
So in the Guardado shooting, there were actually security cameras that captured the entire incident at the auto body shop where Andres was working. However, the sheriff's department, following the shooting, several deputies arrived at the property and either smashed the security cameras or disassembled them and took them with them. A warrant was presented several hours following this happening. So when that was done, they did not have a warrant to do that. And all of the witnesses to the shooting have since fled California for fear of retribution of their testimony. In the DA's analysis of this, they found that the deputies were acting in self-defense based on the fact that a gun made out of different parts was found just away from Andres's body. And they say that, the deputies were, in fear for their life. This young man had a weapon, that sort of thing. However, witness testimony of the shooting, there was a young woman who was interviewed by a fantastic student journalist at LA Community College by the name of James Duffy. Her testimony completely contradicts what Deputy Miguel Vega said in his testimony. And I imagine that video would probably show some contradictory facts. It's very common that, the deputies' versions of events don't really line up with what happened. And I also just want to say that there is a long history in the sheriff's department of deputies planting guns and manipulating evidence. In 2009, there was a 16-year-old by the name of Avery Cody Jr. that was killed in Compton. And his family attorney actually captured on video the deputy that killed this teenager touching his body following the shooting. And the attorney asserts that was done in order to put gunshot residue on Avery's hands to make it look like he did have a gun, when in fact what he was holding in his hands was a T-Mobile sidekick.
Wow. Well, I mean, my experience with reporting on LA Sheriff's Department comes from the Kobe Bryant's crash photos trial, and it was shocking and appalling, all the just blatant perjury that went on in that, and the line that within the sheriff's department over their photographing of the bodies after the helicopter crash, and whether they needed to or not, and then the public distribution of them at like a bar, the deputy showing off the photos at the bar. They had a fire lieutenant actually at the Golden Mike Awards. It was like a radio TV annual award ceremony, and he was passing them around during the cocktail hour. And his testimony in the trial was that it was like a training session or so. And I remember the lawyer for not Vanessa Bryant, but the co-plaintiff, Chris Chester, who lost his wife and son, or wife and daughter, in the crash. He said, he got up. He said, it sounds like you're saying that this cocktail party you were at turned into an impromptu training session. And he said, yes. He said, had you ever had training after a cocktail before? And the deputy just replied, no. But there were a lot of moments like that really highlighted the kind of the idiocy of what they were saying and how unbelievable it was. And near the end of the trial, I thought it was significant that the public corruption, Mac Jenkins, who's was head of the public corruption office and is now head of the entire criminal division for the U.S. Attorney's Office, but he was actually sitting in the courtroom. Whether that means anything's going to come of it or not, I don't know. But it definitely, the perjury from the sheriff's department employees and fire department employees in the Kobe Bryant crash photos trial seemed to get federal attention. And now this is the same unit that brought the indictment against the sheriff's deputies. And in your reporting, have you written about other criminal cases against sheriff's deputies over anything like this, or heard about federal investigations?
Criminal indictments against sheriff's deputies are very few and far between. With our last district attorney in LA County, she only indicted, I believe it was 2 deputies during her multi-year tenure. Georgia Gascon has indicted, a couple more deputies, but we really don't see it around, shootings, number one. And we really don't see it around, these acts of, in my opinion, what appeared to be pretty blatant malfeasance. We don't really see indictments.
Yeah.
Last week, we learned from Carrie over at the LA Times that the district attorney's office had the opportunity to prosecute an alleged member of the Banditos gang who allegedly robbed a professional poker player of about $300 to $500 worth of chips
Oh, wow.
in a traffic stop. And the DA declined to prosecute because, when they tried to contact the poker player that was robbed, he said, I don't want to cooperate anymore because I'm afraid of Los Banditos and deputy gangs. And the DA's position is that without verifying the number of chips that were taken, there is no way forward to pursue this case.
Wow.
Federal indictment, even rarer. This is the
Yeah.
first that I'm hearing of since I began my reporting journey on this topic.
Wow. Wow. Well, it'll be interesting to see the sentencings, what the deputies say, if they give any allocution or anything anything like that. And now take us through your reporting on the early stuff. You were talking about the malfeasance with the security cameras and stuff. How did you find out about that? And how do we know that the deputies did that, got the cameras and took the cameras away before they had a warrant for that?
Definitely. So I was able to interview Memo Torres. He is a journalist over at LA Taco. And Memo was actually the only reporter in Los Angeles that went down to the site of this shooting following it happening. And he was able to get what appears to be the only interview with the owner of the auto body shop. And he was with this gentleman who gave him a tour on camera, which I believe is visible on Memo's Twitter and on YouTube, showing the damage very clearly to the security cameras and talking through, what he observed that night and in the hours following the shooting.
Interesting. And now, and I know there's a commission on deputy gangs that meets fairly regularly. I've been able to watch some of the commission meetings here and there. What is the status of that commission, and how effective do you think it is?
Yeah, so the commission, the Civilian Oversight Commission, issued a report earlier this year, which detailed their findings about deputy gangs, as well as making several recommendations to policies the sheriff's department can adopt to what the Oversight Commission contends end the deputy gang problem. However, the commission does not have any power to force the department to adopt these resolutions. And as of this moment, it does not appear that the department has adopted any of them. So that being said, I think the commission is a very powerful tool in fact finding and, getting this stuff on record. However, without any real mechanism for follow through, it's pretty much useless.
Yeah, and it seems like our previous sheriff took a pretty openly defiant tone and approach to all of this. How is Sheriff Luna's approach compared to Villanueva?
Sheriff Luna has attended several commission meetings. He has been very communicative with the commissioners. My understanding is that he has cooperated with the commissioners in providing any information or documentation they may need. When the inspector general stated that he was asking deputies to come in and show their tattoos, Sheriff Luna, gave the order to go ahead and do that. So I think the relationship is, a lot more collegial than it was under our previous sheriff. But that being said, the bar was really on the floor. So there was really only up to go from Sheriff Villanueva.
Yeah, and is there another meeting coming up? I mean, I guess I can check the agenda, but one thing people should know if they're interested in this is these are all streamed online, streamed on Facebook, so they're very accessible.
Yes, they're super accessible. You can watch them on Facebook. You can sign up to participate via WebEx. The commission meets once a month. And they have also been doing community meetings as a sort of supplementary part to the deputy gang investigation. One piece of feedback that they received was that the investigation was really focused on deputies and the department's experience and wasn't inclusive of the experiences of residents of Los Angeles County that are subjected to deputy violence and deputy harassment. So
Yeah.
they're having these community meetings where folks can come in and share their stories in a safe space to be considered by the commission for a supplementary report to that deputy gang report. I will say that there was a bit of tension at not the last meeting, but the meeting prior to that I attended, where Sheriff Luna was in attendance. Several members of the department came to that meeting, which is very unusual. These community meetings are really designed for the community to come and share. Department-wide participation, having deputies, captains, so on and so forth, is unusual and isn't really part of the intent. One consistent thing that I've heard from community members is that while they appreciate Sheriff Luna being there to hear their testimony, they do not want other members of the department being there, standing at the back of the room with their arms crossed, that kind of thing. It's very intimidating, especially when some of those department members have been part of deputy violence that people are coming to share about, which is what happened at the meeting I attended. A captain that signed off on the beating of a young man by the name of Joseph Perez, who was locked up in central jail for 2 years before his charges were completely dropped. This is a 120-year-old man who suffers from schizophrenia. He was beaten over 100 times by deputies, and that beating was cleared by their captain. This captain chose to show up at the meeting and sit down next to Mr. Perez's mother. That is a very, triggering and can be read as an act of intimidation. And, following that, there was, some tension, some words exchanged, and, Sheriff Luna came down very hard as the deputies needed to be there, that they needed to listen, which did not square with the audience there. And the rest of the meeting was really, members of the audience chastising Mr. Luna and saying that that response was very tone deaf.
Yeah. And that kind of represents the problem when, I saw a response to the indictment announcement or the plea deal announcement for the deputies saying, oh, it's such a disgrace that they honor, this is such a disgrace and a harm to honorable cops. And I think a lot of people share that view that, these cops are just bad apples. But I think some of your reporting and what your reporting has shown is it's not just bad apples, it's a whole bad tree. And that we don't want to just paint all people with the same brush, but when they're all working in the same system, it seems like there's systematic problems at play here and not just personalities or bad apples. Would you agree that's a big point of your reporting?
Oh, definitely. I would totally agree. This system is built to reward this kind of behavior. And we can see in, even current structure of the sheriff's department that many of the people at the top have ties to these deputy gangs and groups that, are said to be very like them. I'm thinking of April Tardy, our current undersheriff. She admitted to me in an interview that she does have a tattoo. She calls a station tattoo. She says there is nothing nefarious about it. She contends that she did nothing wrong during her time at the station that the tattoo is affiliated with. However, I've also spoken to a lot of other deputies who say, that's a load of malarkey and that is a deputy gang.
Yeah. And the tattoos are pretty shocking, but then some of the conduct just that I heard about listening to some of the commission meetings, all of them out having a celebration after a shooting that had actually killed a bystander, or at least was it killed or injured a bystander?
Yes, I believe you're talking about, this was a shooting that happened with a deputy by the name of, I believe it's Taylor Ingersoll in the Compton area, where a 65-year-old bicyclist was killed. And yes, following that shooting, there was a large party, tattoos were given out, and Ingersoll, along with several other deputies, was inducted into the executioner's deputy gang.
Wow. And somebody came forward, or there was some kind of testimony at the commission from somebody who felt uncomfortable with this? Or I just remember hearing about not everybody in the sheriff's department was on board with this, and somebody thought it was unbecoming that they would be having a party after an innocent bystander was killed. Is that right? Do you remember that at the commission hearing? Or
I do, yes. I believe that testimony came from Lieutenant Larry Waldy. Larry Waldy actually sued the county. He charged that he was retaliated against because he stood up against the executioners gang. Waldy freely admits that he himself also has a tattoo. This is a tattoo affiliated with a group that he calls the Gladiators. He says that they are known as the Gladiators. He charges that they are, not a deputy gang, that this is a group of deputies that want to do the right thing. However, he did lose his lawsuit earlier this year. The county argued that the Gladiators were a deputy gang and that this conflict was really two rival gangs fighting for control of the Compton station.
wow, that's not so. And that was a jury. Was that a jury trial or a bench trial in LA Superior Court? Right? Was it a jury that decided that?
I believe that was a jury. Yes.
Wow. Well, a multi-week trial, right? Were you able to see any of the testimony on that?
Just a little bit. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, all these things play out in meetings and various articles, but I mean, we haven't seen very many concrete court cases or court findings against them. So to have not only the federal indictment, but then the plea deals too, where they're just admitting this seems pretty unusual. But well, is there anything else you think people should know about this, or how can they find your reporting on this? How can they follow you?
Yeah, if you want to learn more about deputy gangs, you can visit lasdgangs.com. That's where you'll find my 15-part series on the gangs, as well as links to listen to my podcast that covers all of this as well. You can follow me on social media. I'm on X, I guess it's called now, at Cerise Castle. I'm on Instagram and TikTok. You can find by searching my name, Cerise Castle. And yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is a story that continues to grow and get bigger. So there are lots of updates. And yeah, I encourage you to follow me and read up to keep up to date.
Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Like I said, I plan to cover the sentencings. I guess the next first one is scheduled in January. So maybe I'll see you there and we can do this again.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me again, Meghann.
Great. Thank you. See you around.
See you.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, everyone. See you next time.